And now, as I promised in Pepys the Legacy, we would get a much more in-depth look into the history of Samuel Pepys's prayer book. Being able to see, hold, and share, really, that for me personally and for the page has got to be the greatest moment so far. I'm not going to lie. I'm an ardent Pepys fan, so to be able to connect with him on that level, and as has been suggested to me by several people, that how lovely is it that a book that Samuel Pepys would have held so much, his DNA impregnated into, his spiritual essence, if you believe that, that mine was able to, for a short time, mingle with his. So yeah, definitely greatest moment so far.com. Samuel Pepys's prayer book. The binding of the prayer book dates from circa 1680 and is black Morocco leather with gilded tooling, faded to brown over age. It was restored in the mid to late 19th century, given a new spine, its damaged edges repaired, and the metal clasp and protective corners were added for the further protection and beautification of the book. There's no record or evidence as to when this restore took place, but experts who know their onions, who've examined the book, have dated it to mid to late 19th century. Apart from that, we're dealing with a very original Samuel Pepys piece. Now, when you open the book, this is what you're greeted with. The frontispiece for a Book of Common Prayer. Now, if you look at a contemporary Book of Common Prayer, which you can find other versions of them, they're expensive, but you can find them. When you open it, it is plain, where it says the Book of Common Prayer. It does not have all these Samuel Pepys-esque quill and ink embellishments on its front page. So what a lovely Pepys twist that is, and wonder when that was added and how long it took. A little twist to his artistic nature. Also, and it could have been done when he was listening to a particularly boring sermon, which he commented on several times in his diaries about sermons that bored him, so you never know. But also, and I like this as well, as we look through the book, you'll notice that pages have been neatly ruled in red ink, a ruler, and a quill. And what a lovely throwback that is, because that's exactly what he did with his diaries. And it's obviously something that he learned in his scholarship days and that stayed with him throughout his life. Neatness, and would have made reading certain passages easier for him, particularly as an older man. So yeah, this is what you're greeted with. The few illustrations in the book, bar one, which we're going to see and learn about in a minute, are all contemporary to the mid-17th century. So, like a lot of Samuel Pepys's books and other gentlemen's books in those days, you would have collected your pages, and the pages for a Book of Common Prayer were set out and decreed by the king, as we're going to learn in a minute. And you would have collected illustrations that you liked, personalised your book, and you would have taken those pages to a bookbinder and had them bound and presented in this form. The first 3 pages of the book are missing. First 2 would have likely been blank, and it leaves the imagination reeling as to what may or may not have been written on those books, because Samuel Pepys inscribed a lot of the pages of his books. So was something written on there? Was it very precious to someone? Did they remove it? Where those 3 pages went, no one will ever know. But it opens the the order of morning prayer, pardon me, and a lovely illustration. What makes this book, apart from its Samuel Pepys connection, which makes it rare and special in its own right, of course, but what makes it even rarer and more special is at the very end of the book. You have over to the left the decree by the king to give his nod as the head of the Church of England, with his arms above, as we see in many of the churches that I cover, as to this Book of Common Prayer, that it was okay and what could be preached and what couldn't be preached. And as you see, it was given at our court at Whitehall on the 2nd day of May in the 14th year of our reign. This is in the reign of King Charles II. Now, the ardent royalists of his time dated his reign from the death of his father in 1649. So that would give us a date of 1673. Officialdom, when he came back after the death of Cromwell, dates his reign from 1660, so that would give us a date of 1684, which, if so, was published just 1 year before his death, where he did die at Whitehall, so that's more than likely. So you've got, to the left, extreme head of the Church of England, and then you've got what makes this book even rarer than what it is over to the right, which is a mid-16th century Catholic text and block print dedicated to the Princess Mary Tudor. That's the sister of King Henry VIII, and was published in around 1549. Now this is recorded in only 6 other books, which are in the British Library, the Bodley, Cambridge, St George's Chapel, Windsor, the Folger Shakespeare Library, and the University of Chicago. It makes it very rare, and it is just the sort of woodcut, though, that would have caught Pepys's eye. And it's not something that you would expect to find in a Book of Common Prayer by the Church of England, published almost 130 years later. So this is what I like about the personalisation of books in those days, where you could collect pages and your favourite illustrations, and wherever he got this one from, we do not know. But yeah, and interesting though, isn't it, that Pepys, a non-juror, loyal to the crown, once accused of being a Catholic, who had a wife that was born a Catholic, would mingle the Church of England and Catholicism like this together. It's very interesting. And it also leads me to wonder that, did he actually once say that the Anglican religion came out of Henry VIII's codpiece? It seems a Pepys-like remark from what we know of his writings, but that we don't know. But it's interesting, this, isn't it? And makes it even rarer. Here is the block print and illustration. And here are some of the middle pages of the book. As I said, it illustrates the neatly ruled red lines, of course done with a ruler, and obviously a very fine quilled ink pen. And that's been examined and is contemporary to the book as well. And Pepys did it with other of his books, so we know that he did that. And that, ladies and gents, is our in-depth look at the history of the book. And now for the video itself, which is a quick video of me getting to see, hold and share with you Samuel Pepys' prayer book. Hope you're going to enjoy. An amazing privilege to get to see Samuel Pepys' prayer book.
Thank you, Richard, for all your help. Looking after Sir Timothy Laurie. It went very well. Yeah.
What an amazing privilege to be able to see that. It really is.
It's always my friend down here.
Yeah, I read online that this is embellishments that he did himself. I found the same book, and it hasn't got that in it, so it does. It certainly does make me wonder. Samuel Pepys' prayer book. Wow.
Are you okay with my hand there?
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect.
It's just the
yes,
current thinking is that white gloves make you more clumsy, and
I read that. I read that. Yeah, I use.
And that actually the oils in hands are helpful for books rather than dangerous. For the,
just to think that he sat there in the Navy pew and held that book.
Exactly.
That's just
He
amazing.
used to sit on a gallery.
Thank you.
Anyway,
yes.
It really is in amazing condition.
I'm reluctant,
Yes,
because of the spine, to do much more. Let me just see where sometimes these things fall open.
Oh, here, Graham, here.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, thanks for the start. I know it's not getting on today.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And as you've got clean hands, would you like to literally pick it up and hold it?
I would if you wouldn't mind, yeah.
No,
Oh,
no,
thank
no.
you.
No, please do.
I'll put my phone down.
Okay. And then that one?
That one, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it, thank you.
Okay. And then do you want to tip it slightly towards, that's it?
That's it.
Then you get more of a...
And of course, his greatest legacy, the diaries, and the story of how they survived, and when and where Pepys first likely made that decision that they would survive into the future, is an interesting one.
In the summer of 1692, Pepys told all his friends he was going to the country. Mary had left town, perhaps for Woodhall, perhaps to stay with Lady Buck's family in Lincolnshire. Meanwhile, Pepys stayed put and shut himself up in his library for over 3 months in order to deal with papers that I have so many years been tumultuously gathering and laying by, without a vacancy or hand or head ever to garble, sort, or put in order for use either to myself or any that come after me. Only in September did he confess his deceit to Evelyn and Gale. And then he had also to admit that his months of confinement indoors had caused his left leg to swell so badly that he was now unable to put on a shoe or get downstairs, let alone out of the house. What was the small piece of work, Pepys's description, that demanded such absolute and uninterrupted solitude from a man who normally craved company? No explanation was offered, and the state of Pepys's papers, as they were left to posterity, does not suggest that he spent the time in filing. A guess is that he was reading through his diary and considering its future and his own. To leave a book behind you is the surest form of afterlife, as Pepys, reader and collector of books, knew well. He had remarked years before, on the death of an eminent doctor, that he was a man of good judgment, but hath writ nothing to leave his name to posterity by. Pepys, however, had. There were 6 volumes, still decently veiled in shorthand, that might one day speak for him to posterity, if he had the courage to allow them to survive. Sometime during the last years of his life, he thought the matter over, and this mysterious solitary summer stands as a likely moment for him to have done so. The volumes of the diary were replaced on the shelves and renumbered in the new catalogue he made in 1693.
This is the last known image of Samuel by Godfrey Kneller, painted in 1689, and we catch Samuel as a robust 56-year-old. Now, Samuel lived into his 70th year, so for our eyes, and in this world, there are no images of him of that age, but with the cleverness and trickery of modern technology, for the first time pretty much anywhere, I can give you an impression of what Samuel would have looked like as he approached his 69th and 70th year. And here we have him, the man himself, and the app I've used is pretty good. I've used it before with other pictures where I've had pictures of an ancestor when young, aged them up, compared it to pictures of them when old, and it's pretty good. So this gives us an impression of what Samuel Pepys would have looked like as an older man, and we do approach him towards the end of his life.
He knew death could not be far off, but resisted it at every step. He was 69 in February 1702, and it was only his body that was failing him. The mind was still the man, the wits were still sharp, and he continued to set himself new tasks that absorbed and satisfied him. He now had his entire library moved from York Buildings to Clapham. It was a sign that he did not expect to return to London. It was also a very big operation, although happily he had thought of how they were to be moved from the start and designed the bookcases to be taken apart easily. The cornices were made to lift off, the central sections divided in two, and the bases were provided with carrying handles. Will Hewer prepared a large and splendid room for their installation. As well as the bookcases and Pepys's desk, his two globes were installed on pulleys and his model ships were displayed in their glass cases. He could feel pretty well at home. And both Mrs. Skinner and Pepys used their wills as a means of maintaining their power. He reached his 70th birthday in February 1703. His last known letter was written on behalf of his brother-in-law, a plea for a pension for Balti to the Commander-in-Chief of the fleet. It was, he said, the only request he had made since retiring from the Navy. By now, his bad kidney had reduced his strength to its lowest ebb yet. He was frail, emaciated, and in pain. Urinary infections are acutely painful, and there was no effective treatment. In March, he sent a message to Dr. Hicks, who agreed to come when Pepys felt he was approaching his end. In April, he was told he had no hope of recovery. Once he heard, he set about a complete revision of his will, dictating two enormous codicils on successive days, the 12th and the 13th of May. In the first, he took away the Brampton estates from his nephew Sam, allowing him no more than an annuity of £40 a year. Brampton went to John, with the major part of the estate. He was also given the library in trust, charged with joint responsibility with Hewer for finding the best means for preserving it. In one body, undivided, unsold, and secure against all manner of diminution, damages, and embezzlements. And finally disposed for the benefit of posterity. Two further sets of instructions specified what they were to do. All his books were to go to one of our universities, and rather Cambridge than Oxford. To a library, preferably that of Magdalen, with Trinity as a fallback, and the collection must be kept entire and separate in a room to be chosen by Jackson in the new building. No one allowed to remove any books except the master, and he only as far as his lodge. He proposed a system of annual visitation by Trinity to check that his instructions were being obeyed in perpetuity, giving them the right to the library if they found any infringement by Magdalen. Everything about his instructions indicates that Pepys had prepared them with the greatest care, and must have thought and planned the disposal of his library over a considerable period before it made its last-minute appearance in his will. They are also so idiosyncratic that he may have modelled the conditions on those of another Cambridge College library, that of Matthew Parker at Corpus Christi, which had been similarly protected to good effect. This was not the only striking last-minute addition. Mary, not so much as mentioned in the earlier will, makes her first appearance in the 12th of May codicil. Whereas I hold myself obliged on this occasion to leave behind me the most full and lasting acknowledgment of my esteem, respect, and gratitude to the excellent lady, Mrs. Mary Skinner, for the many important effects of her steady friendship and assistances during the whole course of my life within the last 33 years. I do give and devise unto the said Mrs. Mary Skinner, one annuity or yearly payment of £200 of lawful money of England, for and during the term of her natural life. As the end approached, Pepys began to think of more he could do for Mary. Another codicil assigned to her £5,000 of the £28,000 owed him by the government, and a verbal request, carefully noted down, stated his wish to give £50 worth of plate each to Mrs. Skinner, Mr. Hewer and J.J., as well as pictures and goods to Mrs. Skinner. On the 14th of May, 1703, John Evelyn, himself recovering from a broken leg, called to see Pepys and found him languishing with small hope of recovery, which much affected me. The weather, he noted, was lovely, fair and temperate. The summer conditions Pepys had always delighted in. It was left to John Jackson to give an account of his uncle's last days. He did well. On Monday, the 24th of May, Dr. Hicks arrived and found Pepys lying on a couch. He prayed by him, and then taking his hand and finding his pulse very weak, told him he should simply say, "Come, Lord Jesus, come quickly." Pepys, practical to the last, asked him to pray to God to shorten his misery. That evening he fell into convulsions, trembling and breathing with difficulty. At 4 in the morning he showed more signs of distress and asked for the curtains and windows to be opened. Whilst lying on the couch, he beckoned me to him, Jackson reported, took me by the hand, the same by Mrs. Skinner, and speaking to me as well as he could, said, "Be good friends. I do desire it of you." In conclusion of which I offered to kiss his cheek. He turned his mouth and pressed my lips with an extraordinary affection. "Dr. Hicks coming," Mr. Hewer told him, upon which he ordered himself to be raised up in his bed, and the doctor coming in performed the office for the sick, and gave him the absolution, laying his hand on his head. The service done, Uncle said, "God be gracious to me," blessed the Dean and all of us, and prayed to God to reward us all, and Mrs. Skinner then appearing said, "And thee in particular, my dear child." During the next hours, Pepys thanked all his servants and kissed some of them, and as night fell again, Jackson recorded, Mrs. Skinner and I stole up to his bed to see him, and shook him by the hand, he not discerning who it was. Dr. Shadwell coming, was stolen in to feel his pulse, which was quite gone. About 1 on Wednesday morning, Paris, a servant, crossed the room. Uncle called him and asked for me where I was. "In bed." "Shall I call him?" "No." By and by again asked for me. "Shall I call him?" "Yes." He did so, and I came and found him lying on the bed, rattling in the throat and breathing very hard. He had taken no nourishment for 2 days, and he died, according to his own reliable watch, at 3:47. The sun was about to rise in the summer sky. The funeral on June the 4th was at St. Olave's at 9 o'clock at night, as decreed by Pepys, who chose to be buried in a vault below Elizabeth's monument. The coffin was brought from Clapham in what was described as a very honourable and solemn manner. Dr. Hicks took the service. Political divisions were laid aside. 4 of the pallbearers were non-jurors and 2 were Whigs. The non-jurors were the Earl of Clarendon, Anthony Dean, and Charles Hatton. They were joined by the Earl of Feversham, a personal friend and supporter of James II. The other 2 were Sir Thomas Littleton and James Vernon, both connected with Mary Skinner, and surely chosen for that reason. After the funeral, Dr. Hicks wrote of Pepys, The greatness of his behaviour in his long and sharp trial before his death was in every respect answerable to his great life, and I believe no man went out of this world with greater contempt of it or more lively faith in everything that was revealed of the world to come. I never attended any sick or dying person that died with so much Christian greatness of mind, or a more lively sense of immortality, or so much fortitude and patience.